So I need to make a interface system that's removable but positively locates the cross brace. This is what I've come up with. It's fairly simple, but it's going to take a lot of steps to build, but once it's built, it'll be a really quick, easy pop-in, positively located system. The bulk of what I'm going to do here is using some 1 3/4 OD DOM and some 1.5 OD DOM with 1/8 inch wall on each. So I'll be able to have one slip inside of the other if I need to sand the inside to loosen that up a little bit due to, you know, welding stress and everything else. That won't be a problem, or plenty of wall thickness. But then by having a tube locate on a tube, we'll be able to have it located in 360 degrees so it won't be tight in one direction but loose in another. The main part of it being removable is going to be using a bolt to hold it in. For starters, I'm going to work on the base, so I need a captured nut basically. So this washer is a little bit smaller than the 1.5 OD tube. So I'll be able to weld the washer to the tube, I need to weld the nut to the washer, and then I can weld them all together, and then I'll have my captured nut. Don't forget to grind off a lot of the zinc coating on grade 8 stuff. Puts off a smell, it's not good gases for you. I ground quite a bit off of there, but I'm still getting a little bit. I have gotten sick from that before I knew that that was a thing, so pay attention to that. Now that I've got these receiver sides made, I just shaped them a little bit to sit on the tube. Got my leveling cube just to make sure that I can get it as close to level in both directions as possible. I can't really tack it all together, or at least I'm afraid to, because I'm nervous about how much other stuff is going to move around while I'm doing this. So I'm probably going to try to get all of the parts and pieces made and then kind of set everything together before I tack and start welding anything. Although with the shape that these came out, I have a strange temptation to paint them green. Got my bends and lengths laid out for bending the tube. Came up with a little bit over 71 inches and 3/8, about I'll probably end up cutting it about 75, leaving myself a little bit of extra on each end just in case if the angles need to be bent more than I'm planning. I have that extra length to be able to still make the tube work. So as you can see here, I have my center line, my bend starts, and my clamp blocks marked out. The clamp blocks are 6 inches away from the bend start because that's the offset of the bender. I'm going to mock the tube up in the car. Just looking to try to get it centered, and I'm using the header panel to square it up. I don't know if that's really the best way to do it. I mean, it's either that or somewhere on the cowl or windshield. But this is just a structural support bar, so I really don't need to be super critical with it, which is good because I screwed up and I didn't tighten this clamp bar enough, so it slid a little bit. I don't know if you can see the marks there. So there's where the block was supposed to be. So it slid on me a little bit, but in the name of not wasting tube, and because this is not super critical with fitment, I mean, I got wide open space to work with, as long as it clears the brake master and the window wipers, which it will. And I'm going to be making a bracket off of the tube that is inside of this fender here anyway. We're not going to have any problems making the outside mounts. Now, if I had made and welded on the outside mounts first, I'd kind of be locked into I gotta redo the bend, but I knew things weren't going to be perfect, so this is why I'm building it this way. This is why I haven't, welded on the stands. I could have, drilled the hole and welded them and all that stuff before getting to this point, but I just want to mock up everything. That way, when I start welding, I know everything's going to fit. First thing I need to do to continue here is trim the ends off so I'll actually drop inside the car to where I want. I'm just going to eyeball and put a mark across here that's going to be just enough to clear the fenders. I will have to cut some more later on in order to fit the mounts, but for now I just want to be able to get it down inside the chassis because it's not going to be this high, and I want to be able to get it down and figure out these two inner mounts first before I worry about building the outside ones. Now I need to figure out what height I actually want this at, and then prepare to drill the tube for the standoff tubes. So the plan is that they're going to drop inside of the receivers that I made. And you're going to sit down. This is the shortest one I have, so actually that's a pretty good height to make everything work out the way I want. And then the plan will be to drill through the center of this larger tube, and then it'll actually be touching tube on both ends, plus I'll be able to weld it all the way around, top and bottom. So I just need to make sure it's centered, but I probably also want to get this tube leveled in the car, so I'll use that gauge cube. And then since these blocks are about the right height, I should be able to slide them back and forth and let it sit on top of the valve covers until I have the tube level, and then I can mark out where I'm going to drill. I had to commandeer the camera tripod for the laser. I might be getting a little overboard with this, but the idea here is I got the laser square to the header panel on the car because there really isn't any other good reference point to go off of. And I'm just lining it up with the center of where them tubes are going to land. And now I'm going to take a crossbar, set it in there, get it squared up and positioned over the top, and then I can mark center point for at least in this direction on the tube for drilling the hole. I marked when the laser was on center, lined up with where the standoffs are going to go. And then I use the laser to kind of line up with my support bar there for center, and then hit the center and was able to mark locations. I'm not absolutely confident if this is going to work out any better than if I just eyeballed it and drilled a hole, but I did plan for a little bit of rotation. I got about a 3-degree tip up to line up with the bars that are under here. Or, well, I don't know, it says 4 according to clamp block. It's 3 because of the 45 angle and however that works out. But I think this clamp block, lucky that I left them on here, because if I didn't, I'd have no reference whatsoever. So I got about 4.1 on both sides. for the rotation. So I should be able to go over and use my notcher and get this in a position where I can line up with center and make sure that I have that 4.1 degrees factored in. This seemed like a clever way to mark these. However, it's pretty obvious that it's off to one side, which means it's probably gonna cut out past here and leave some on the inside. And I suppose I could try to adjust for that bit of inconsistency by moving the holes over to try to hit it on center still. It'll move the tube a little bit versus where I had it mocked up in the car, but that won't be the end of the world. Or I can just accept the fact that it's going to be really hard to get it dead center on the tube, especially because now it's in a little bit of a bend because the one side slid. There you can see it. Yeah, I don't know. If it breaks through on one side, whatever, it'll have more than enough to hold the pipe. It might make our bend a little bit wonky, and then welding on it's definitely gonna affect it a little bit, but that's why we're building the fender side mounts last. Well, I'm not sure if this is gonna work the way I think it's gonna work. So, I have it set up. Got my marks in there. And it's lined up. And it's lined up as best as I can. Kind of looking at it from multiple angles. I was going to slide this up to get it centered on the tube, and then I realized that, oh yeah, if I do that, I'm moving it in and back. Instead, I would want to technically move it that way, otherwise my spacing is getting tighter. So I'm better off just going with where I marked everything. The tube will stick out the side, but that's okay. I can put weld all the way up it, and it'll make it a little weird there. We might lose a couple of degrees of bend because of it. However, that shouldn't be an issue with getting to fit in the car. I'm realizing I coulda, shoulda, or coulda, shoulda, woulda. Like, well, if this doesn't work, I'll just start over again and I'll make the center wider. That way these holes that I'm drilling through can just go off of center line, and the bend will start at least an inch or two past. And then maybe instead of a 45 degree bend, it'll be a 50 degree bend to land in the same place. But at this point, I'm curious just how this is going to work out. It's about learning as I go. So if I can save this part and make it work, cool. If I do nothing else other than learn the wrong way to do it, that's fine too. It appears that I got the 4 degrees tilt pretty good. However, that ain't even close to square. And that's going to be an issue. I think we're going to have to chalk this one up to the lessons learned and just start from scratch and do it the much, much easier way that I had originally planned. I bent up a new piece, made it wider in the middle. This time I have center marked, and then I left blocks on, and now I marked both sides. And now I'm going to be drilling into a flat here because the bend starts right there. And it makes it much easier to actually hit that thing on center. Looks great. I've also got the 4 degrees in it that I was shooting for. We'll see how this one comes out. Just finished TIG welding the stubs on, or stands, whatever you want to call them. Kind of did in 4 passes. Welds look pretty nice. They're sticking out of the top here though, and rather than it keeping it like that, I'm probably going to grind it off, so it means I'm going to end up blending the welds out on the top. So much for me having pretty welds that were visible. All of it'll be on the bottom, but just gotta cut the ends off so I can get it down, fit down the chassis like I did before. And then once I can kind of get it positioned here, I'll take the receivers, get them positioned on the frame, and get that tack welded before I start building the fender mount. I'll need to cut down the length of this one, but in order to make sure that this bar winds up level in the chassis, I'm going to start with a short one. And I'm not confident that both of these things came out at exactly the same height. I mean, I tried to, but then with a little bit of a grinding to make it fit on the tube, and then the fact that those coilover hoop tubes might not be exactly the same, despite how much I tried to make them the same when I did them. So this one might need to end up just a little slightly shorter, slightly longer possibly. But I need to be able to bolt these on to get a good height measurement, which means I need a way to have basically a surface with a bolt hole here, because it'll be accessible with a socket from the top. That's why I wanted to go through the tube this way. I don't have any. I have one more washer that was the size I used, but I'm not sure that that's going to be thick enough to carry the load. So I have these old, I think they were trailer spring brackets or something, so I'll just cut my own washer out of there to then weld onto the end of the tubes. What you didn't see was me spending the last, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes trimming the base of this one so that it actually sat level in the car. It's because there's nothing really good to go off of. I'm just going off of the valve cover to center and using the cube to verify that that's like 0.3 of a degree is all that those two things disagree by. So I'm pretty sure I spent quite a bit of time making sure the engine sat level in the chassis, because when I redid the whole front end on this thing, I literally had everything blown off, so it would have been really easy to do at that point. And then like the 0.3 disagreements might just be, you know, the intake manifold, the throttle body, the air cleaner. There's a lot of variable there versus just going off the valve covers, which could be a little bit of variable too, but we're at the point where it looks pretty even on both sides, lining up at them tubes. So more than close enough for what I'm doing. Probably going to start with tack welding the bases in, and then we'll see about, I might need to trim some of this inner fender away first, because the way I got this made, I want to be able to set the bracket against the tube, and for that I'm using a little bit of this material, so that'll be, you know, sit against the tube. And then I'll have brackets like this so that it can sit on there. The support tube will weld to here, and then I'll drill some holes, weld some nuts on the back side, and that'll be our fender side brackets on both ends. I screwed up yet again. Seems to be a theme with this project. I didn't factor in that when I cut the tubes a little shorter to fit the mounts, it was going to move this way. So I had to add a 1/4 inch plate in there to bridge the gap. Otherwise it would have been right flush with the end of the mount like I was planning, but oh well. I was able to save it this time, just at the expense of some extra weight, but quite frankly I don't think this car is going to notice. It'll benefit way more from the added structural integrity than it will be hurt by the weight. I'm waiting for this to cool down since I just welded that stuff, and I'll remove the bar, finish welding around each end. Then I can take the grinder to it, take any sharp corners off, blend it out, make it look less like it was messed up and more like it was done on purpose. So it's looking a lot less like a screw up and more intentional. I also added pads on each side so it'll actually lock that mount on the chassis in place. There might be just enough wiggle room for easy install and removal. I mean, maybe a 1/16 of clearance, but other than that, it should do a lot better job of holding it should it move around a little bit in the bowl hole. But time to get this thing wiped down and shoot some paint on it, and then I can get it installed. Well, after all that work, was it worth it? I guess that'll be yet to be determined. Visually, between the master cylinder and the brake master brace that I made before, if I have no tension on between them, I was able to set the cell phone on top of master and look at the movement difference. That seems to be visually a improvement. While it still does have just a little bit of flex, it's a lot less than it was. As far as any other benefits of strengthening up the front end here, I can only imagine that it's going to help. When I originally made the hoops and mounted the coilovers up much higher, away from where the original factory spring sat, that was one of the things I was concerned with, whether it would be enough or not. But I mean, I've driven the car like this for 2 years now, and it's not like they created a failure point. But if they're pushing around and moving, which I suspect they are, because there's a few torn out mounts on the wheel tubs themselves, which are pretty dang flexible. So if they're moving far enough that the tubs are outside of their flexibility range and cracking, I can only imagine that that must be those mounts moving around a little bit, but maybe I'm wrong there. Either way, adding the rigidity and stiffness across the top of the engine and then out to the fenders besides, so that that's mounted to those tubes that bolt in below the windshield. I mean, bare minimum, I'm adding rigidity and strength to the front end at the cost of some weight up high in the car. Now with the brake master, I didn't see a whole lot of difference. I did put the indicator on it, and I got it down to 13 thou-ish movement when standing on it. It might be a couple of thou less than that, like 10 to 12. But that's not a whole lot. However, I could, instead of doing this bracket brace off of that hoop like I could just redesign it so that it mounts to this cross brace tube, in which case it might even be less. But at some point there's just enough compounding parts here that maybe there's just going to be some movement in there anyway. I doubt it will ever hit completely down to zero. But considering the amount of movement before I started this project and that snowballed into making this cross brace, it was over 50 thousandths, so we're down to a quarter of that. We're very close to a quarter of the amount of movement. So that should help. I mean, it's maybe been a lot more work than it needed to be just from figuring out how to do this, but hopefully there'll be benefits that are not exactly quantifiable right now sitting in the garage out on the racetrack.